The internet didn't just blink, it froze. It held its breath like it knew something ugly, something explosive was about to come crashing through the screen. And when Tom Bower returned, yes, that Tom Bower, the man whispered about in palace corridors, feared in press offices, and watched nervously by royal aides, he didn't arrive quietly. He arrived like a match tossed into a room soaked in gasoline.
I choose people who don't want to be written about, on the whole, whose lives are shrouded in mystery, and they want to hide their secrets. And I just love the king has been far too lenient with him. And that it's not just now this sex case.
The timing alone felt intentional, calculated, almost cruel. One moment, the royal rumor mill was grinding along as usual. The next, it was screaming. Because when Bower resurfaces, history says one thing very clearly: someone is about to have their carefully curated image ripped apart thread by thread. And this time, it wasn't just one name trembling in the shadows.
There are two truths. The first truth is that the conversation, I'm told and I believe, was very early on in their relationship when Harry is bowled over.
There it was, the pause, the posture, that knowing look, no headline, no flashy announcement. Just a man leaning back, fingers steepled, wearing the expression of someone who already knew the damage was done, and then he dropped it. One sentence, vague, sharp, lethal. A sentence that didn't explain anything and somehow said everything. People would be shocked, he said, shocked by how closely intertwined certain royal figures truly were, shocked by who benefited. And just like that, the fuse was lit. No names were spoken, but names didn't need to be. The internet filled in the blanks faster than any newsroom ever could. Screens lit up, group chats exploded, editors stopped mid-scroll, and two deeply controversial names started circulating like wildfire: Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew. The collision felt unreal, almost absurd, and yet, once the idea took hold, it refused to let go.
Yes, it is a bad look, especially for Prince Andrew, because he has always denied having any sort of sexual contact with Epstein's girls.
On the surface, they existed in completely different royal universes, different scandals, different narratives, different reputational scars. But suddenly, under Bower's shadow, their stories snapped together like puzzle pieces no one wanted to examine too closely. And the questions came flooding in. What did he mean? Why now? What had been buried so deep that even hinting at it caused this level of hysteria? Theories multiplied by the minute. Some whispered about money, others about power, some about long-held grudges, internal palace wars, or secrets exchanged in rooms the public would never see. But the theory that truly ignited the frenzy, the one people couldn't stop circling back to, was darker. That Bower was preparing to rip open a chapter the palace had spent years, maybe decades, forcing into silence. A chapter where Meghan and Andrew's paths, directly or indirectly, intersected in ways that were never meant to be scrutinized. And Bower? He said nothing more. By sunrise, the chaos was unstoppable. TikTok, X, YouTube, royal gossip forums, 5 million reposts, reaction videos piling up by the hour, American late-night hosts cracking jokes that only added fuel to the fire. But behind palace gates, this wasn't funny, not even a little. Sources whispered that emergency meetings were underway almost immediately. Phones rang off the hook. Communications teams moved into damage control mode. When Tom Bower speaks, nobody sleeps.
About his relationship, and there was no compulsion for him to do it. And that not only
2 hours later, just when people thought the frenzy couldn't get worse, it did. Bower struck again, this time with an extended excerpt released live. Still no names, still no specifics, just one sentence: cold, surgical, devastating. Events people believed were separate, he said, were shaped by the same hand. That line landed like a brick through glass. The internet didn't just speculate anymore, it spiraled.
I was shocked at just how thin-skinned Harry is. You know, Meghan I almost understood. She's a Hollywood B-list to be charitable actress. She was a social climber. Her whole thing is about image, so I can see why she's so easy to upset.
Every word was dissected, parsed, replayed. Who was the hand? What events? And why did the timing feel so brutally precise? Meghan was already facing PR turbulence. Critics were circling, old grievances resurfacing. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew was once again under renewed scrutiny. His name dragged back into conversations the palace desperately wanted buried. And suddenly, Bower's words felt less like commentary and more like a warning. Insiders claimed Meghan's team was furious, scrambling, panicked, demanding answers that nobody seemed able to give. Calls were placed to anyone who might have insight, anyone who might know what Bower was holding back. Panic crept into every conversation. Andrew's camp, by contrast, went silent. And in the royal world, silence is never accidental. It's defensive, strategic, terrifying. Archives were raided, old memos resurfaced, overlapping timelines examined, charity appearances, palace schedules, nothing concrete. nothing provable. But the tension was suffocating. Then came the leak, a whisper from inside a production studio claiming Bauer's material would shock audiences on both sides of the Atlantic, that it would expose connections nobody realized existed. The leak detonated. In Montecito, Meghan reportedly paced as phones rang nonstop. Lawyers, advisors, crisis strategists. She felt targeted, obsessively so. An insider claimed she believed Bauer had fixated on her, and that belief only deepened the fear. Meanwhile, at Royal Lodge, the atmosphere was grim. Staff whispered that Andrew had been warned, that old wounds might reopen, that this wasn't just noise, and then Bauer finally spoke plainly. He leaned forward, looked straight into the camera, and said the line that changed everything. This was the chapter the palace hoped he would never write. The reaction was instant, electric. News anchors cut into programming, comment sections exploded, and suddenly the question wasn't if Meghan and Andrew were about to face a storm, it was how devastating it would be, and who would suffer most when it hit. Bauer accused no one of crimes, but that wasn't the point. His power has never been about accusations. It's about interpretation, about reframing history in ways that expose uncomfortable truths. And this time, he had struck a nerve the monarchy had spent years trying to numb. Inside Buckingham Palace, aides insisted they weren't blindsided. They knew the book was coming. They expected sharp commentary. What they didn't expect was the speed at which the public would weaponize his words, turning interpretation into viral narrative within hours. In Montecito, calm dissolved completely. Meghan was reportedly stunned, furious, demanding to know how anecdotes she believed buried had resurfaced. Harry, by contrast, was said to be emotionally wrecked, exhausted by yet another wave of scrutiny crashing toward their home. Across the ocean, Andrew's corner of the royal world wasn't faring any better. Anxiety spread quietly, heavily, like fog. Royal experts flooded live streams, panels erupted, commentators who rarely agreed suddenly spoke the same language. Bauer had hit a pressure point. Celebrity, power, scandal, addiction, public expectation. The world couldn't look away. Behind palace walls, ropes tightened, meetings multiplied, scripts were reviewed, optics scrutinized, every word weighed, because perception in the royal world often matters more than fact. Speculation exploded. Would Meghan strike back, stay silent? Would Andrew retreat further into obscurity, or quietly attempt damage control? Through it all, Bauer remained unmoved, calm, unbothered. When asked, he said simply, if people didn't like the reflection, that wasn't his problem. The line went viral within minutes. Then came another twist. A source claimed Meghan began drafting a personal response. Not legal, not official, but strategic. She wanted to frame Bauer as biased, obsessed, targeting women who challenged power. Whether it would work was anyone's guess, but the pressure was undeniable. And while teams debated strategy, the internet did what it does best. Old clips resurfaced, forgotten interviews, half-remembered quotes. Everything Meghan and Andrew had ever said was dragged back into the light. Montages went viral. Podcasts dissected for hours. Interpretation became theory. Theory became narrative. Narrative became wildfire. The palace responded the only way it knows how. Silence, disciplined, detached. But even that felt fragile this time. Through it all, Bauer didn't flinch. Editors described him calm, sipping tea, refusing to change a single word. He writes for the public record, not royal approval. And that perhaps was what frightened both camps most, because unlike gossip, his work doesn't fade, it lives on. And this story, it was only beginning, and as the dust refused to settle, something else became impossible to ignore. The longer the silence stretched, the louder it grew. Every hour without a denial, every carefully avoided statement, every strategically unanswered question only fed the sense that something raw had been touched. Not proven, not confirmed, but disturbed, like a locked door rattled hard enough to make everyone inside freeze. Behind closed doors, aides were said to be arguing, not about facts, but about timing. Timing of responses, timing of appearances, timing of what not to do, because in the royal ecosystem, reacting too fast can be just as dangerous as reacting too late. And Bauer knew that. He always had. He understood that uncertainty is more corrosive than accusation. Online, the mood shifted. The early shock morphed into obsession. People weren't just reacting anymore. They were reframing. Entire timelines were being reconstructed by strangers with Wi-Fi and determination. Screenshots layered over old headlines. Charity galas re-examined. Seating charts dissected like crime scenes. Nothing definitive surfaced, but it didn't matter. The absence of clarity became its own form of evidence in the court of public opinion. What unsettled many observers most wasn't what Bauer said, but what he didn't. He left gaps. And those gaps became echo chambers. In royal history, gaps are dangerous. They invite imagination, and imagination doesn't respect palace protocol. Whispers suggested senior figures were growing frustrated. Not panicked, Irritated that yet again the monarchy was being forced to respond to a narrative it didn't control. Irritated that two names, already synonymous with controversy, were dragging the institution back into chaos by proximity alone. Whether fair or not, the perception was forming fast, and once perception hardens, it's nearly impossible to reverse. Meanwhile, the Sussex camp reportedly felt cornered. Allies debated whether counterattacks would inflame things further or finally draw a line. Some argued silence looked like weakness. Others warned that speaking would only validate Bower's framing. The tension inside that debate was said to be intense. Every option felt like a trap. Andrew's situation was even more delicate. He had no public platform left to leverage, no goodwill buffer, no margin for miscalculation. Any response risked reopening wounds the family had worked tirelessly to scar over. And so, the quiet continued. Heavy, deliberate, loaded. What became increasingly clear was that this wasn't about a single revelation. It was about convergence. Two controversial figures, one relentless biographer, a public already exhausted by royal scandal yet unable to look away. Bower hadn't exposed a secret, he'd exposed a fault line, and the tremors were spreading outward. Commentators began noting the pattern. Bower never rushes. He lets reactions ripen. He lets people reveal themselves through their fear, their outrage, their denials. The story, in his hands, doesn't need embellishment. It feeds on response, and the response had been deafening. As days passed, the initial frenzy cooled into something more ominous. Expectation. The sense that this wasn't the climax, that the real blow hadn't landed yet, that what people were reacting to was only the prologue. And that sense gnawed at everyone involved. Producers teased upcoming interviews. Publishers hinted at chapters yet to be discussed. The press calendar filled with cautious placeholders. No confirmations, just anticipation, the kind that keeps reputations awake at night. In royal circles, the phrase "weathering the storm" was reportedly used more than once. But storms imply passing. This felt different. This felt structural, like a narrative shift that couldn't be undone once released into the wild, and through it all, the public watched, not as passive spectators, but as participants, commenting, sharing, interpreting, choosing sides. The story became communal property, shaped by emotion as much as information. One insider summed it up quietly. This wasn't about guilt or innocence, it was about legacy, about how history remembers moments when power, fame, and silence intersect, about who gets to write the record when institutions hesitate. Bower, unmoved, continued exactly as he always had. No backtracking, no clarification tours, no softening, just the steady confidence of someone who knows that once a question is planted deeply enough, it grows on its own. And that may be the most unsettling part of all. Because whatever comes next, whether explosive or subtle, the line has already been crossed. The conversation has already shifted. The spotlight has already moved. And in the unforgiving glare of public memory, there is no rewind button.